Proposition 34. Death penalty. Initiative statute. Plain language, repeal the death penalty. What does it do? Well, I'm sure you can guess. It outlaws the death penalty and replaces it with life in prison without the possibility of parole. Anyone currently on death row would be resentenced to life in prison. It requires that anyone found guilty of murder must work while in prison, and portions of their wages must be given to victims as restitution and/or be used to pay any orders against the convicted individual. Finally, Proposition 34 requires $100 million of tax money from the general fund be directed to law enforcement agencies for investigations of homicide and rape cases. Fiscal impact. It is estimated by the legislative analyst that this bill would save $100 million or more each year due to the elimination of death penalty appeals and other murder trial expenses. This saved money would then be applied to the extra $100 million that's supposed to go to law enforcement agencies for murder and rape investigations. The first few years, this $100 million would be paid with new tax money while Prop 34 is being implemented, and after everything is all settled and in place, the savings from the death penalty expenses would, in theory, be enough to cover this $100 million allocation of tax money every year. Long story short, Proposition 34 ends the death penalty and replaces it with life in prison without the possibility of parole, and directs the savings from this measure to be used in rape and homicide investigations. Have you ever been sentenced to death? Are you considering it? Here are some fun facts about the death penalty that relate to this bill. Fact 1. It can take a couple of decades for a death penalty sentence to run its course. During this time, both state and county governments incur costs related to murder trials. Courts, prosecution, defense attorneys if the person can't afford legal representation, and more! Fact 2. Since California enacted the death penalty in 1978, 900 have been sentenced to death. 14 have actually been executed, 83 have died prior to being executed, and 75 have had their sentences reduced by the courts. 725 are still currently on death row, just hanging out. Fact 3. It's more expensive to house a death row inmate than any other inmate. Various security regulations and procedures result in increased security costs for these inmates. For example, inmates under a death sentence are generally handcuffed and escorted at all times by 1 or 2 officers while outside their cells. Plus, they are required to have their own cells where other inmates would normally share. Fiscal impact of repealing the death penalty. Trials are shortened when the death penalty is no longer an option because there is no need for a separate phase to determine whether the death penalty will be imposed. Moreover, more public attorneys are used when the death penalty is an option, and all death penalty sentences are reviewed by the California Supreme Court. If these factors were eliminated, there would be an estimated savings of about $50 million annually. Well, I'd say those facts are pretty darn fun. The proponents of Prop 34 say evidence shows that more than 100 innocent people have been sentenced to death in the US, and some have been executed. If someone's executed and later found innocent, we can't take it back. Prop 34 means we'll never execute an innocent person in California. They provide 2 examples. Frankie Carrillo was 16 when he was arrested and wrongly convicted of murder in Los Angeles. It took 20 years to show his innocence. Cameron Willingham was executed in 2004 in Texas for an arson that killed his children. Impartial investigators have since concluded that there was no arson. Ouch. Only 13 people have been executed since 1967 and no one since 2006. Most death row inmates die of old age. Meanwhile, we waste millions of tax dollars on special housing and taxpayer-financed appeals that can last 25 years. They say 46% of murders and 56% of rapes go unsolved, while we waste millions on a handful of criminals already behind bars. Prop 34 ends expensive special housing, lawyers, and private cells for death row inmates. We need those wasted tax dollars for our schools. Today, death row inmates sit around doing nothing. Prop 34 makes convicted killers work and pay into the Victims' Compensation Fund as ordered by a judge. It frees up millions of wasted tax dollars to help our kids' schools and catch more murderers and rapists without raising taxes. Prop 34 saves tax dollars and directs $100 million in savings for more DNA testing, crime labs, and other tools that help cops solve rapes and murders. Prop 34 makes killers who commit horrible crimes spend the rest of their lives in prison with no hope of ever getting out. It makes them work so they can pay restitution to their victims. That's justice that works. The death penalty doesn't make us safer. Better crime solving does. And for the no's? Jerry Brown says there are no innocent inmates on California's death row. The proponents of Proposition 34 are so desperate they'll say anything to get your vote, so they'll purposely use misleading terms like innocence, solving crimes, and saving money. But don't be fooled, Prop 34 takes $100 million from California's general fund. The claim that $100 million comes from alleged savings is false. Prop 34 will cost taxpayers millions more annually by guaranteeing murderers lifetime housing and healthcare benefits. Prop 34's so-called work requirement is a joke. Making killers take PE classes meets this requirement. You know, PE classes always did remind me of death row. Anyway, the yes on Prop 34 people use the Frankie Carrillo example, but he never even got a death sentence. Prop 34 punishes the families of those who suffered horrific deaths by condemned killers. That's why every California law enforcement organization opposes Prop 34. Don't let guilty murderers win. Scott Peterson murdered his wife Lacey and their unborn son. He earned his death sentence. Lacey was innocent. Baby Connor was helpless. California is broke. Abolishing the death penalty costs taxpayers $100 million over the next 4 years and many more in the future. Instead of justice, killers get lifetime housing and healthcare benefits. This is not about money. It's about the ACLU's agenda to weaken public safety laws. Prop 34 supporters make cost claims based on newspaper articles and studies written by the ACLU or other death penalty opponents. When California's death penalty was eliminated before, condemned criminals were released only to rape and kill again. Voters had to restore capital punishment to restore justice. They continue saying, we are talking about criminals who have killed, mutilated, and tortured 12-year-old girls, people who have widowed pregnant wives. Serial killer Robert Rhodes kidnapped 8-year-old Michael Lyons, raped and tortured him for 10 hours, and stabbed him 70 times before slitting his throat and dumping his body in a river. Finally, the opponents of Prop 34 ask, do you think that giving vicious killers lifetime housing and healthcare benefits saves money? So this is definitely a killer issue, but it is first a moral issue. If you believe capital punishment is a moral obligation, you should vote no on Prop 34 regardless of savings. If you believe capital punishment is morally wrong, you should vote yes on Prop 34. Right is right. If it's not a moral issue for you, then you've got to weigh the costs and benefits. Closure, justice, savings, efficiency, costs. That's pretty much where I am. I don't have any great conviction on the issue. As long as I'm not the one pulling the switch, whatever. After all, it's not like we're talking about jaywalkers or graffiti artists here. We're talking about rapists, murderers, and sadists. And I'm pretty much okay with these sick, twisted evil types being executed if it's certain that they did what they did. Now, this is California. We're no Texas. Everyone knows you can't just be murdering up in Texas because they will take you down. They do more frying than KFC over there. California, for all this hoopla, has only actually executed 14 people. So to go through decades of trials and appeals and high security imprisonment and lawyers and paperwork and Supreme Court reviews, all to have most of these people die on death row of natural causes, yeah, that does seem a little counterproductive. Now, the yes on 34 people say that murderers will have to work in prison. I'm not sure how meaningful this provision will be in practice. I mean, are they going to give murderers tools? What kind of work are you going to trust a convicted rapist murderer to do? I think they just added that to make people feel good. Then they threw in that business about repealing the death penalty will help schools. Just throw that in there, why not? There's no evidence that it will actually do this, but hey, it never hurts to mention the schools. Plus, I should note that there will be some ways that this proposition may not save money. The legislative analyst notes that many people take plea bargains for murder charges to avoid death penalty trials. But if they knew that the death penalty wasn't an option, many criminals may decide that maybe they're not so guilty after all, and maybe a long, drawn-out trial wouldn't be so bad. Another thing I'm leery about is that as part of this bill, $100 million must be transferred from the general fund to the new Safe California Fund from 2012 to 2016. In case you haven't noticed, California is not running a surplus at this time. So obviously, other programs will suffer if this goes through. In theory, Prop 34 saves money and that extra money will in turn be spent on Safe California. I don't know. If they really believed in this, I wish they would have just written a bill to repeal the death penalty and left it at that. But because this is California, of course they had to add a $100 million commission. Plus, who really knows if that $100 million will be made up for in savings? And quickly looking back over the opposition arguments again, Jerry Brown says there are no innocent inmates on California's death row. Well, yeah, maybe he's right. I'm not sure that's the most compelling way to make that point, but sure, I'll buy it. If you can't get out of there after 25 years of appeals, reviews, and paperwork, you probably did it. Then they try to say Prop 34 will cost taxpayers millions more annually by guaranteeing murderers lifetime housing and healthcare benefits. Well, it looks like either way, that's the story, death penalty or no death penalty. Even with the death penalty, looking at these numbers, it doesn't seem like many people make it to the golden pastures before dying of old age, so we might as well get used to paying for their flu shots and sex changes either way. The work requirement is a joke? Yeah, probably so. Prop 34 punishes the families of victims? That's a matter of opinion. California is broke. We can't afford the $100 million Save California Commission? Yep. So a yes vote on Prop 34 ends the death penalty in California, and a no vote keeps the death penalty instated. I am at a complete loss. I'm tired of thinking about this. I've been going back and forth on it for days like it's a life or death issue. Anyway, I had to get this video out at some point, so I'm not issuing an opinion at this time. I've still got a few weeks to weigh this out, and hopefully I can come down on something. So the Daryl Johnson Show says on Proposition 34.